Now let's look at creating some code to update a post. So we're going to have to firstly create the roots for this. So let's jump over to our web.php file. And I'm just going to copy this down twice because we're going to need two roots for this. So the first root is going to be showing the form with the edit page on it. And then the second one is where we're going to send the request to manage the update. So the first one is just a standard GET request. And this time in the URI, we're going to pass it an ID. And this is the ID of the post that we want to edit. So we can do this by opening our curly braces. And then we just need to give this a name, a variable name. And I'm just going to call this ID. So when the user goes to this page, Laravel will pass along the ID as a variable, so we can pick that up and then look up in the database for a post with that ID. And then on the end here, I'm just going to do /edit. And I'm putting the edit on the end here because normally in an application, you might want to just view a post, and that will be /post / the ID. But with the /edit, then we know we want to edit this post. So in the post controller, we're going to create two new methods, one for the edit and one to actually store the update. So this one is going to be called edit. And likewise, we'll update our name for the root of edit. Now for the actual updating, when we send the data to the server, we want to use put. So when you send a put request, that HTTP verb basically means you want to update something. So like in our get root here, we're also going to pass along the ID, and this is the ID of the post that we want to update. So let's just put the ID in there, and then the method that we've not created yet, but we're going to call it update. And then again for the name, let's change this to update. So let's jump over to our post controller and start building out our edit and update methods. So over in our post controller towards the bottom, let's create a new public function. And we're going to start with the edit first. So we need to pick up that variable from the URL that we named ID. So we can just put a new variable here called ID, and we can type in this to an integer because we know we're expecting a number. So now inside of this edit, we need to get that post with the ID and then send it down to a new view and populate the form with the current data. So I'm just going to scroll up to the index method here, and I'm just going to copy this. We can use this as a starting point. So down in here, let's paste this in here. So currently now this query is getting all the posts, but we only want one post, and that is the post where the ID is equal to what we passed in. So let's just change this variable to post, and we see we're getting a DB table of posts, and then we can just chain on the where method. And now this takes in two parameters. So firstly, it needs to know what column to look at and then what data to find. So we can say where ID, so where the primary key of ID is equal to the ID that we're passing in through the URL. And then we can just get that as we did with all the posts. And then for our view, let's organize these views a little bit better. So currently we just have a single post view. And I'm going to start putting these into a folder. So the folder is going to be called posts. And then we can just use the dot syntax again, like we do in our roots. And we're going to look for the blade file called edit.blade.php. Now remember, Laravel automatically assumes your file is called .blade.php. So we don't need to put that on the end here. So let's just change this from post to post and change that from post to post also. Now let's jump over to our folder structure, and then we'll come down to our resources and our views, and let's create a new folder in here, and we'll call this posts. Okay, and then we can move our post.blade.php file up into there, and then inside of here, let's just make a copy of this. And I'll paste this in, and I'll rename it to edit.blade.php. Now I'm also going to rename this post.blade.php because the standard normally is to stick with the controller methods. So this would be index.blade.php. So let's rename this. So I'm renaming this from post.blade.php to index.blade.php. Okay, so back over in our post controller on our index method, we have to change this now to return the index view. So we're going to go into our post folder and we're going to get the index view. So let's just test this out in the browser. So let's just refresh the page. And you can see it still returns as our view. It's just this time it's in a dedicated folder, so it's more organized as your application grows. Okay, so let's build out our edit page. And we've already got the starting point here from our index. And we want to get rid of this loop over the post as we don't need that anymore. And we can change the title to edit post. Now in our form action, we want to go to our post update. So we can change this now to update. And remember, this is the second route that we created in our routes file. We called it post.update. So we can now reference that. And it requires another parameter. So if you remember, it requires an ID on the end. So over here, as a second parameter into that route method, we can get our post that we passed down. So remember, over in our controller, we pass down the post. So we can now access that post. So we can say post, and we want to pass in the ID. Now Laravel, using this route helper, will get the route for post.update, and it'll append the ID on the end. Now I did say this was a put request. Now most browsers currently don't support that. You still have to use the method of post. But we still need to let Laravel know that this is a put request so it can route it to our put route rather than our post route. So to do that, we just have to spoof the form. And there's a blade directive built into Laravel for this called @method. And then we just need to let it know what method we're wanting to send this with, and it was a put. So we can leave the rest of this for now. So we've got our title. And in here, instead of value old title, we can say, let's get the post and the title. So it'll populate the form with the current post title of the post we're trying to edit. So on the button, let's just change this to update. And we can leave our errors loop in here because we'll be adding some validation onto this shortly. So now back over in our index.play.php file, we need to link to the edit page. So where we're looping over the posts here on the list items, let's create a new link here, and we'll give this a href. And we'll use our route helper method again. So let's open up our double curly braces. And we're going to say route. And we want to route this to posts.edit. And again, the edit is expecting ID. So in our current loop of posts, we can just grab the ID of the current post. So we can say post ID. And then let's give this link a title of edit. So just a quick change before we check this out in the browser. Back over in our post controller, we're using the get call. Now this creates an array, but we're only expecting one item back. So instead of get, we can call first. And this will just return us the first post it finds where the ID matches the ID. And obviously in our case, because the ID is a primary key and it's unique, there'll only ever be one anyway. So this will just bring us back just one item. So now let's jump over to our browser and check this out. So as you can see, now we have our posts and each of the edit links for each post. And if you can see down the bottom right here, the browser, the ID is being put in. So when we go to edit, we know which post we want to edit. So let's click on edit on my first post. You can see now we're editing the post and it's populated the title for us that we got from the database. So the next thing we need to do is build up our update method so we can store the updated post title. So let's create a new public function here. And we're going to call this update. And again, this takes in an ID and we can type in that to integer. And we're also going to want to get a copy of the HTTP request. So we can just type in request again, like we did previously. And let's put this into a variable called request. So the first thing we want to do is grab that title from the update form. So we can put this into a variable, we'll say title, and that is going to be equal to the request and the input of title. Now remember, this key here is related to the name on the form. So over in our edit.blade.php file, this input has a name of title. And then in our controller, we can get that out the request using the same name of title. So now let's update our table. So we're going to call the DB facade again. We're going to tell it that the table we want to update is posts. And we want to update where the ID column is equal to the ID that we're passing in here from the form URL. And then we can pass it in an array of the data we want to update. So we can call the update method on the end here and pass it in an array. So even if you're only updating one item, you still pass this in as an array. So I'm just going to break this down onto a new line so it's easier to read. So we can say the title column, we want to update that now to our newly inputted title, like so. And now that we've updated, we want to redirect the user back to the index page. So we can say return, and we'll call the helper method redirect. And we want to redirect back to, and we can use our root helper method here. And we want to redirect back to our posts.index. So once this post has been saved, redirect the user back to the post index. So let's try this out in the browser. So let's get rid of my first post title here, and we'll change this over to updated post title. And then let's click update post. And you can see there now we've now updated the post title. So currently there's no validation on this form. Now the validation is the same as the create method. Now instead of copying and pasting this, I'm going to introduce you to another part of Laravel that we've not touched on yet, and that is form requests.